question of law, question of fact, and mixed question of law and fact. Question of law. Think of question of law as the basis for the operation of the law. It's like a handbook on how to make legal decisions. This problem arises when existing laws or regulations must be interpreted and applied to a particular situation. The judge has an important role here. They use their legal expertise to analyze statutes, precedents, and legal precedents to determine how to use them to make decisions. Imagine you are playing a board game and you are unsure of the rules. You can refer to the rulebook to find out how. Similarly, when a legal issue arises, legal experts consult the law's rulebook before making a decision. Example: is the defendant liable for breach of contract based on the language used in the agreement? Does the evidence presented meet the legal standard for establishing a case of negligence? Question of fact. Now let's talk about the question of fact. It's like a piecing together in a puzzle game. In a legal case, it is about determining the order of events, actions, and events that occur. This problem arises when there is a disagreement about the exact details of what happened. Judges often participate in deciding questions of fact. They listen to witnesses, examine physical evidence, and evaluate information to determine what really happened. Imagine trying to figure out who ate the last cookie at a family party. You can talk to anyone who comes and collects evidence like hotcakes to find out the truth. Examples: did the defendant exceed the speed limit at the time of the accident? Did the plaintiff suffer injuries as a result of using the defendant's product? In law, lawyers present evidence to help the jury decide the facts of the case. Once the facts are established, question of law come into play as to how to apply the facts to the law. Essentially, question of law are about rules and principles, while question of fact are about actual events and situations. Both are very important for ensuring justice and the fair results of the trial. Just as a skilled chef follows a recipe, a question of law, and uses the right ingredients to prepare a dish, a question of fact, the law ensures that these points come to a decision. Mixed question of law and fact. When we talk about mixed question of law and fact, we are talking about situations that involve legal interpretation and determination of facts. In other words, it is a combination of the two concepts we discussed earlier, question of law and question of fact. Imagine you are baking cookies and follow the recipe. The recipe shows you the steps, the law, but it will take some judgment to decide how long to bake based on the facts, temperature of the oven. Similarly, in the legal context, mixed legal and factual issues arise when law has to be applied to a particular situation. Was the defendant's use of force reasonable in self-defense? Involves both legal principles regarding self-defense and factual determinations about the circumstances of the incident. Did the plaintiff have a reasonable expectation of privacy in the given situation, and was it violated by the defendant? Involves legal principles related to privacy and factual determinations about the specific situation. Here is an example to help clarify the issue. Suppose there is a case involving a car accident. Questions of fact will involve determining who is at fault based on statements and evidence such as stop signs. Now, mixed question of law and fact come into play when you decide whether the actions that caused the accident meet the legal definition of negligence. In this case, you not only need to know the outcome, question of fact, but you also need to use legal standards on the facts, question of law, to determine whether there was something people did negligently. Therefore, legal issues and complex facts require information gathering and legal analysis. It's like mixing the ingredients, real, with the recipe, right, until the end of the dish, decision. Lawyers and judges need to carefully consider these 2 points in order to make fair and correct decisions. Explanation with examples. Now we will explain them with examples. Question of law example. Consider a dispute between 2 neighbors over a property line. Neighbor A claimed that their fence was built on their property, while neighbor B argued that the fence encroached on their land. In this case, the question of law will include the legal definition of the area of the land according to local laws and regulations. The judge must interpret the law to determine how the property is considered property, and apply that interpretation to the situation to determine whether neighbor A's fence is legal. Question of fact example. Let's consider a simple store associated with a criminal. Defendant A was charged with the crime. The question of fact here would involve determining whether A was in the store at the time of the robbery. Physical evidence such as statements, security cameras, and fingerprints will be examined to determine whether A was really at the scene. Mixed question of law and fact example. Now, let's say A's defense says that he was at the market during the robbery but was not involved in the crime. He was just an innocent bystander. In this case, mixed question of law and fact arise. The law includes the use of the concept of aiding and abetting, which is the law intended to determine whether a crime has been found, but whether non-participation is still a crime. The reality aspect involves determining whether there was intent to aid or abet the robbery, even if it did not directly affect A. Difference among them. In practice, the distinction between questions of law and fact is crucial. Judges decide questions of law, and juries decide questions of fact. However, the division is not always perfectly clear-cut, and there can be areas where the two intersect. Mixed questions arise when the application of the law to the facts is at issue, requiring a combined analysis. For example, in a criminal trial, the question of whether a defendant's actions meet the legal definition of a particular crime is a question of law. On the other hand, the question of whether the defendant actually performed those actions, e.g., committed a robbery, is a question of fact for the jury to decide. If there is a dispute about the legal standard to be applied in determining guilt, it becomes a mixed question of law and fact. Conclusion. A question of law focuses on the application of legal principles. A question of fact deals with determining what actually happened, and a mixed question of law and fact combines legal interpretation with factual analysis. The decision-makers for each type of question vary, with judges handling questions of law, juries handling questions of fact, and a combination of both for mixed questions.